All right. Welcome, Ian. I'm so excited to have you here today to share a little bit about your story and kind of your journey from into a new career in UX design. I'd love if you could share a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and tell us, take us way back to before you even knew what UX was.
Yeah, okay. Well, my name's Ian Messersmith, and I grew up in Southern California. Um, I was always a part of like the arts community. I grew up loving the theater world and was kind of a bit into everything growing up in Southern California, gave a lot of opportunities to do a bunch of different things. And theater always kind of was in the background and was always kind of there with me. And so I started to like slowly but surely attach my identity to being like the theater guy. And that led to just going to college and studying directing. And I went to UC Santa Barbara, and they have like a BFA style directing program there where they start with 20 people and they whittle it down to 4 people. And those 4 people get to direct shows in their senior year. So it's extremely competitive. And I was one of those 4 people selected. And so it was
Congrats.
thanks. And so I was like,
Yeah.
great, this is going to be amazing. Like this is going to skyrocket me into my career. And it did. It propelled me into a theater career. And I worked in professional theater for nearly 10 years or so. And so it became really tied to who I was. I would travel around the country to different theaters and work as a professional stage manager. I worked in New York and Chicago and Denver, and I ended up back in Southern California. And I worked for my alma mater as a assistant production manager, and then got connected with somebody at the University of Tennessee and started working there and worked there for 4.5 years before moving to Utah with my wife, who I met in Tennessee. And there I went back to grad school and got my MFA in dramatic writing from the University of Idaho. They had a remote program there where they worked with young professionals that were tied to professional theaters to give them an opportunity to get an MFA virtually. And so I got my MFA in dramatic writing. And while I was in the MFA program, we had a child. And so I played stay-at-home dad as well as full-time students and playwrights and community activist. And so it really was quite a lot on my plate all at once. And towards the end of my grad school experience, I was kind of thinking like, okay, well, what am I going to actually do with my MFA in dramatic writing? Am I going to become this playwright? Am I going to go into academia? Like what's the move? And so I started doing some research on like what to do and like where to go. And I came across this article about the power of storytelling through UX design. And my wife worked for Qualtrics, which is a UX survey software company.
Yeah.
And so I kind of already knew like the word UX. And so I was like, all right, let me look into this. And so I started looking into it a bit more, and I read that article, and it was just blew me away. I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. This is the power of storytelling through digital design and being able to help people and finding ways to empower people through empathy and control over their user experience. Was like, this is really amazing. Like, this is something that I could find myself doing. And so I went to TikTok and I found Avocademy on there and decided to start looking into it. But before that was quite a big tumultuous point in my life. So after grad school, I decided to go into production management, which is what I had been doing for years, because after the pandemic, it was really hard to find a job in professional theater, as well as find a job in that world in general. A lot of people were leaving the professional theater and going to academia. And so who are you going to give a job to? This guy who has, 1-2 credits on his resume, or someone who's been on Broadway for 20 years, that's what you want. And so it was really competitive and difficult to find a job as a teacher. And so I went back to production management, and we sold our home in Utah and moved to North Carolina and bought a house there. And I started working for this theater and helped them reopen their doors after the pandemic. And it was really, really hard. It was 12, 14-hour days. And it was a lot. There was a few weeks where I didn't see my son awake. I just saw him on a monitor asleep, and would check in with my wife and asked her how he was doing and stuff. And it just wasn't what I wanted anymore. And I had, like I said earlier, had tied so much of myself and my identity into being this theater guy that I was like, well, if I leave, who am I going to be? What is that going to make me as I leave this, you know, career field and stuff? And so I went through not only foundations, but I also went through an identity crisis, you know. And I think that anyone that's considering doing this or going through a career transition, there is a part of that played a big part for me personally in this whole journey of like trying to understand, who am I coming into this and who will I be on the other side of it all? And that might just be because like I'm an artsy fartsy person and I get so tied up into the, like, my heart is on my sleeve, and you know, so other people it may not be as hard, it could be cut and dry for them, but for me it was really emotionally tied to, this has been my identity for so long, this is what I love to do, how am I going to bring that to this UX world? How am I going to not relinquish all of who I was? And then I found it's really quite easy. You can really bring a lot of your lived experience and your personal skills, because we all are users. We all are individuals that have had these experiences, to bring your user experience to the table and be able to help others as well. So that's kind of the long story of my short answer of how I got here.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. Tell me a little bit more about kind of the decision point where you were like, you know, you found us on TikTok, like how much time went by before you were like, okay, I'm gonna try this? And was this like identity crisis, did it happen before you decided, or did it happen as you were deciding? Like, I think a lot of people probably listening are struggling with like, how do I know I'm making the right choice? So I would love to hear about you, you know, like, did you resolve the identity crisis, or at least experience it for a certain period of time before you took the leap? Or were you like taking the leap and then that triggered the identity crisis? Like how did that look in terms of your experience?
Yeah, so it was a slow process. I think that I found UX while I was still in grad school, and then I worked for that theater company for close to 6 months after that. And then really, I'd say it was like October of 21 that I really started looking at it more seriously and thinking like, okay, what am I going to do to get out of this, 12 to 14 hour day job, And it was December. We had come home for Christmas. My wife and I had poured over like all the TikTok content that we possibly could find about UX and everything that Avocademy had to offer. We went on the website, and we spent a few days kind of toying with the idea, and then we talked to my older sister about it. And family's a big thing for me; it's very important. And my older sister just said, after telling her the whole story and everything, she was just like, "Well, what's stopping you?" And I was like, well, I don't know, it's like, it costs money and stuff. And she's like, but in the long scheme of life, like what's that, and like, if it gets you a career where you're making twice as much money as you are now for half the hours, and it seems worth the shot, for the price point. And I was like, you're right. I think you're right. And that night, we had a couple cocktails and we were all talking and it was the holidays and stuff. And at the end of the night, my wife and I were sitting on the couch and we were talking and connecting about it. And we pulled up the registration form and I said, are we doing this? Am I going to do this? And she said, I think we're doing it. And it was one of those things where it wasn't it wasn't I'm doing this. Am I going to do this? It was we the whole time. And so depending on an individual situation, I really relied on my family and I really relied on my partner to help me make that decision.
Yeah.
It didn't happen overnight. It was something that came over time. And I think with anybody that's going through a career transition, the identity crisis stuff it does happen during for me, it happened before, during, and after. I'm still very much going through it in my day-to-day life at work. I'll say stuff like, oh, well, when I was doing theater, or back in my theater life, my previous life, I say it all the time, so it's not something that goes away. I think it's something that that grows with you,
Yeah. Awesome. So you register right after having a couple cocktails, but a very well thought out, plan.
Yeah, no. It's very well
thought out. Yeah, not a drunken purchase. And and you start foundations. Tell us a little bit about that. Were you like shocked? Were you, like scared? Were there doubts? Were you excited? How was your experience going through foundations?
Yeah, my experience in foundations was very, very scary. But I have this like philosophy of like, if I'm uncomfortable, I know I'm learning. So I felt uncomfortable the entire time. So I felt like I was learning a lot. I mean, to give you perspective, I didn't have a Facebook until like 2015. Like, it's like technology and me weren't necessarily best of friends, and I was kind of adverse to it for such a long time. And I felt like it was some sort of superpower to be able to stay away from it. And so leaning into this idea of like, okay, I can do this technology stuff, and I can get behind the idea of like learning a software and being an expert in that software is something that I never thought that I would do, like want me to learn the philosophies of some director and like, emulate his styles on a stage. Sure. But like, to like learn a software, like, come on, Yeah. So it was like, that was for me a big hurdle, was like, hitting those walls, hitting those blocks, which will definitely happen throughout the entire process. And then giving yourself that moment to say, no, I know this is frustrating, but I can do it. I can do this. I can keep going. If anyone else can do it, if I can do this, I can make this happen. Like, I can just keep going, stay determined, and push through it. And so I do know that there's a lot of roadblocks that come with the experience. There's times when it felt really lonely, where I was like, I don't know who to reach out to or how to make this connection. But Avocademy does have like a really great community, where you're able to just kind of put questions out there, and sometimes there's answers, sometimes there's not, but there's always someone willing to point you in the right direction, and I think that was something that really, really helped me along the way. But I will say that because I was going through so much, it really did feel like I was on an island a lot of the time. Like, it felt like, how do I make more connections? How do I make this the most out of this program? And hindsight's 2020. I think that there's a lot more that I could have done to like try to make that experience more robust and reach out more often, and not feel like I was burdening or bothersome when it came to like reaching out and stuff. You're learning something new. It's going to be challenging, and it's hard to go from being like an expert in your field to being, to literally knowing nothing, like to not even understanding what a frame is, or what Figma is, So there's a lot of learning curves along the path, but it's just, for me, it had a lot to do with swallowing my pride and like just being like, okay, humbling myself to learning something that I never thought that I would do. Humbling myself to that experience really helps me put things in perspective of like, hey, this is actually kind of exciting. Like, I get to be a student again, I get to learn something brand new and fun and exciting that is going to ultimately pay me a lot of money. So it worked out really well for me in the end. So yeah.
So you start, I'm assuming, in January, right? Because you said you signed up in December 21. You start January of 2022. Around what time did you finish foundations? Do you remember? Like what?
Yeah, I finished foundations around March, end of March, and then I started. I think I started Jumpstart Career Jumpstart shortly after that. I don't know the exact date.
Yeah, so you spent 3 months in foundations. You've like kind of gotten over the like, okay, I'm gonna learn all this new stuff. You learn it obviously because to finish foundations, you need to be able to design, right? You finish your first case study. You join Career Jumpstart. in March, April, right?
Hmm.
Ish.
Yeah.
How's that experience? Because it's very different, right? And I think, some of the things you're mentioning in foundations, when you get to CJ, you have other people, right? Like you're working in groups. I personally think you've made a really big effort to get involved in CJ. Like I still remember how much fun I had on those daily calls. Like I knew you were going to be on, like every day sharing something, either about, taking care of your child or like, how your interview process is going. But tell us a little bit more, like, you get into CJ, what does it look like? How does it feel different? What are those first projects like?
Yeah. So at the end of foundations, I kind of told myself I knew that this is what I was going to do. I was like, okay, I'm gonna embrace this change now. I'm gonna go into Career Jumpstart and really just take it head on. And that's where I did start reaching out and having more community. You're put on projects with teams, which is like such an amazing experience for somebody like me, because I am an extrovert. I enjoy community. I enjoy collaboration. And so for me, it was really, really important to have that. And it was so nice and refreshing after being heads down with the solo project to coming up with like a group project, learning the dynamics of that, getting the knowledge that they have, the things that they were able to pick up along the way that I didn't, or that they learned from reading some other article that they went on some rabbit hole with. And like, just being able to have that sounding board community to bounce off of. And then it was really refreshing because I realized I wasn't alone. There were plenty of other people that were in that program that had young kids at home, and there were other people. We started a parents channel in Slack just for us, that like all the UX people, Avocademy people that had that were parents, and it was really great, and like we were able to talk about our kids and whatever drama and struggles, we were able to help each other through those things. And then not only that, but just the Slack community in general, the people you see in the daily calls, you reach out to them on DMs and you're able to just talk to them, communicate, find community. I still talk to those people. We have group chats on our phones now and weekly wine nights and stuff like that. So it's like you find your community where you want it, and this really provided an amazing platform to find community for me, but also a breeding ground for like learned, not like shared knowledge, like everybody was at the same level or around the same level that you were with. And so your team was able to like give you ideas of like, well, we worked on this previous project like this, and we worked like that. And so you just kind of find the way and the groove with everybody else. And it just provided this amazing platform for community and networking and connection, and it's really cool, I think, also to like see some of the people that I've made connections with on LinkedIn, like getting that second and even third job now and seeing their growth in their careers and saying, wow, like I know somebody that works at XYZ company,
Right.
so, and the reality was, and this is something that I would tell people often in the daily calls, is that like a future hiring manager or future senior UX designer is in this room right now. And they're going to work with you on a project. They're going to see how you work. They're going to remember you because they were in the trenches back in the day with you. And those are the people that you bring up with you when you go along. So
Yeah.
I think that it's just an amazing opportunity to find people that think like you and work like you and can, create opportunities down the line as well.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. We uploaded recently to YouTube a video. It was a little bit before your time, so I don't know if you know Sammy and Carlota, but they both graduated. They were like really close. They worked on a project together in CJ, and then they both went on to their first jobs. Carlota got her second job, and she hired Sammy onto her team at the second company, right? So it's exactly what you're saying, right? And this is not like a year and a half has passed since they graduated CJ, so that she's not a hiring manager. She just has influence, right, over who she can bring on to her team. So it's exactly what you're saying. We're already seeing kind of like the community years after expand, help each other in the grad Slack channel that you're part of. Like people are posting jobs. I think, Ginny posted the other day, we're hiring someone. It can't be a fresh person, but if you've been out for, a couple months, like look at this job. So it's been interesting. I think when I created Avocademy, I never thought about the community effect of it. And then I started seeing it as we expanded and evolved into different things. And now hearing that you all have like a group chat and there's like a weekly wine night just like warms my heart. It makes me so happy. I'm like, these people met, you know, and like here they are kind of like continuing on in their lives. So that's
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think on even a deeper level than that though, and not to like take the conversation in like a really deep way, but in some ways, Avocademy saved my life and saved the what I had at the core of my life. And I think that it it, it really crawls to the community that you provided for us. It really did make a platform where people could be vulnerable and people could be honest about their journey and what they were going through. And so I used that as a form of therapy, of group therapy, as it were, to be able to say, I'm having a terrible day. Like, this was really, really hard. We kept calling it the roller coaster during the daily calls.
Yeah.
And some days you're at the peak and some days you're at the lows, and some days you're right in the middle of it all and you're in the free fall of right after an interview or right before an interview, and it's hard. And if it wasn't for that community, I don't know if I could have stuck through it all to really see it to the job part.
Yeah.
I think that that's a huge testament to what you've built, and in such a bigger way than just like, hey, here's some projects to get on your resume. Like it's so much more than that. It's so much more.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder, because other programs, their like career support is after the fact. Like, you graduate and now you have to find a job. And I think for us, like, the most valuable thing that we bring is those 6 months of career support. Like, that's the hard. People think like, okay, I have my portfolio, now the easy part. But it's really the opposite, right? It's like, I have my portfolio, now the hard part, right? Because like that is the emotion. Like, it's truly an emotional roller coaster of like, it could be, and like 6 months, 2 to 6 months, if you're lucky and you have structure and like someone's holding you accountable to what you said you're doing. Some people spend a year and a half after graduating, other programs alone experiencing this, right? Like that, I can't even fathom like how exhausting it must be to go through that, because I remember seeing you, right? And you were super vulnerable on our daily calls. You were sharing your experience. I remember you'd be like, today we're at the bottom of the roller coaster. Today, I'm going to share my win. And for you, how long did it take you to land the job you're at now from beginning to end?
4 months.
4 months. And maybe.
Well, actually, the job search process, I think it was 2.5 months.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, 2.5 to 4 months. Somewhere around.
Okay, yeah. And maybe let's back up and share, if you do feel comfortable sharing, like kind of what happened. Okay. Let's do it. So let's share what happened. So you start applying for work. I remember you start doing some mock interviews. It's the first time you're interviewing for like a tech job. Walk us through kind of like what happens next, because I think it's a really important story to share, and there's a lot of lessons there.
Yeah. So, and some context to it all. Like I said, I'm the artsy fartsy guy up to this point. So I've never had to like build a resume and like have a portfolio. It's really like, do you need a stage manager? I know a guy, and it was him. It was me. And so I felt really vulnerable, like interviewing with people, like having to actually sit down and profess who I am and like tell them all my ins and outs of how I'm a designer and you really want to hire me and stuff. That was really hard to like sell myself in that way. And so I was never really much of a performer either. I was always behind, directors, playwright and stuff. So for me to like have to like record myself and like understand and see myself vulnerably that way really was hard to do. And I think that that's something that just everyone should acknowledge across the board, that it's not easy. It's not something that you just inherently know how to do. And so it's another part of the learning curve, of the learning process of all of this. And so I started applying for jobs. I hit the ground running. I would try to hit 40 like every other day, if not every day, if I could. And, was constantly applying for jobs because it was my full-time job to apply for jobs. And so by that point, I had left the theater. I was just looking for work, and my wife was supporting us. And I got into second and third round interviews with a couple of companies, and I was really excited to actually like be breaking past that first round and getting into the second and third round interviews. And I got a verbal offer from a company, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is happening. Like, I called my mom, I cried to my wife, like I had like the big congratulations from everybody in the channel and everything. The lady said, we're just working on the paperwork, should have stuff to you by Friday. She gives me a call the next day. We're talking numbers, but I was like, just send me the contract or whatever, and we'll talk about it then. And just never comes. And I reach out to her, and like a few days later, and she's just like, oh, we're still working on things. It'll, just need a few more days. And then it never comes. And then another week goes by, and another week. And before you know it, it's like a month. And I'm like, I've like stopped looking for work. I had a verbal, like you told me it was going to be there by Friday,
It
like,
was celebrated. Yeah, it was done.
It's like,
yeah,
the champagne has been popped, So anyway, it was really, really hard to face that. And the reality, and still to this day, I'm still waiting for that offer to come. It never really resolved at all. It just kind of, the would-be manager at that job that no longer works there reached out to me after they had left and said that they never experienced anything like that. And it actually had a catalyst for one of the reasons why they chose to leave. And so, I think I dodged a bullet in the long scheme of things. It seems like it was obviously a company that was going through some sort of change or difficulties, and I'm glad I wasn't a part of it. But it was really difficult to get back on the horse and to like drag myself out of bed, like let alone like to the computer to start actually looking for jobs again. And I felt really angry and resentful, like the first 30 to 40 applications that I put in. And, it really did, again, it took a village. It took the community kind of pulling me up and saying, what are you doing? Like, come on, like get back in there. Like, we miss you on the daily calls. We miss you being involved. Like, where's my support system? So it was hard, but if it wasn't for the CJ community, I think that's where I would have given up. I would have been like, well, clearly this was all just a scam, and I'm just gonna go back and, figure something else out, be a substitute teacher or something, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it would have been a different path for me. And something that I was really excited about was UX, and I wanted to do it. So it was just really hard to like get back up on the horse and like keep trying. And when I did, I was like, okay, like I've learned a lot of lessons from that. I know that I could get back to that verbal offer and finish the crossing line to get the actual offer. And that's what everyone kept saying. And it just became like a mantra for me. It's like, I did it once before, I can do it again. I can do that again. Like if I got to the second round, oh, I've gotten to second rounds again. I can do that again. Got to third round, great. I know I can do that again, And I think that that's what it was for me. It was just like playing a video game, you got to beat the boss at level 1 to get to level 2, to level 3, to level 4. And that's what it was for me. I was just trying to beat the boss to get to the next level, and literally my supervisor to the next boss, to the next boss, all the way up to the CFO, and so, I think it takes a village, and it took a lot of effort and grit to just say like, I gotta keep going, and that really was instilled in me a lot during foundations. When I would hit those roadblocks, it was like, no, like I gotta keep going. I just gotta keep moving forward, So
I remember when this happened, like I was in shock, and I was like, oh, of all people, Ian, like he's, I was like, I just wanted to go give you a hug. And I know I think I let like 2 weeks pass, and I was like checking in on you every now and then. And then at one point I was like, it's time. Like, I think it's time to get back on. I'm really glad you did. Why don't you share kind of like the outcome of all this, right? You got back on, you beat all the bosses. Like, tell us a little bit about where you're at now, your job, how you like it. How is the UX designer life, right? Like, how's having this job and completing the career change?
Yeah, so the journey isn't over. It keeps going once you're on the other side. So many points in this, I thought like the learning was done, and I'm gonna just keep. Now the career part starts, and that's just hasn't been the case. So once you're on the job, you learn a lot, you grow even more, you develop things that you never even knew you need to know, like interpersonal relationships with your developers and how amazing that relationship can truly be, and like what that means, like really actually means. And so I think at the end of it all, I ended up now I work for Norwegian Cruise Lines. I'm assigned to Regent Seven Seas Cruises, which is their luxury brand. And I am their sole UX designer, UI UX designer for their entire mobile, tablet, and web platforms. And so it's a huge job, and we're redesigning the entire website right now. I'm working on redesigning the Find a Cruise platform, the landing page, which when you go to a cruise website, what are you going to do? You're going to look for a cruise. And so this is this is the heart and soul of the company, and I'm working on it right now, and they're trusting me to work on it. I just handed off a redesign of the dining experience for the user. So when they're booking their dining experiences on cruises, it's completely different now. It's beautiful, it's elegant, it flows so nicely. We've already gotten amazing feedback from testing. And so it's been a really great experience of like saying like, hey, I've learned this whole skill, and now here I am getting paid a ton of money to do it, and they are trusting me to do it, And now, mind you, I have an amazing team around me of content writers and other people that know the brand inside and out, strategic people and people that are numbers people, and they give me the content that I need to put in there. So I'm not alone, but it does feel like, there is an island when it comes to like coming up with ideas and figuring out where to source, how to do those things, and really relying on your relationship with your developers and your direct supervisor to like really make a team out of those people, because developers can be artists too, and they know the ins and outs of that system so well, that you need to rely on them to know what's possible and how to work those things. But as far as the experience, it's been hard. My family and I, we bought our home in North Carolina. It was kind of like the end of that life. That previous life of ours was like selling that home. Now we've moved down to Miami, and it's really cool to live in beautiful Miami and have this experience, and just, it's gorgeous here all the time. And, so I never thought in a million years I'd ever live in Miami, let alone as a UX designer, working for Norwegian Cruise Line. So just thinking that this is my life in general is kind of beyond me, the learning experience on the job is hard at times, because you want to toe that line of like what's expected of me to know, and what is expected of me to learn on my own before asking for help, right? I think that it's a constant balancing act between those three things. And that's where I always struggle, is like, when do I stop looking myself and ask for help? Or, and I think that that's just something that I'm personally working on. But I think one thing that I was really scared of at first was like, will everyone think I'm a fraud? Well, I had such a bad imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Yeah.
It was so terrible, especially like the first couple of months here. Like my boss was like, I'm confused by your question. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's confused. I asked the wrong way. Like it was like, it was like, no, she was just confused. Like, just say it again in a different way.
Yeah.
It's okay to have questions,
Yeah.
And it really did take up until like a couple months ago. I mean, I've been on the job for 6 months now. So about 4 months in was when I finally felt comfortable enough to say, this is my first in-house design position. Before this, I worked at a design agency, and they did things quite different there. So can you explain to me how you guys are doing it here? Or can you explain to me why we're doing it this way, or what the thought is behind this? I'd love to, learn. And instead of coming at it from a way of like, well, I know this is the way I was taught, it's more of like, hey, I'm willing to learn. I want to understand, just tell me how you want handoff done. This is for you. It's not for me, So those kinds of things.
And those questions you'll have to keep asking for the rest of your career in UX. Every time you switch teams, right? Every time you switch companies, like I don't think those are things. I think when you're breaking into the industry, there's this like feeling of I should know how to do everything, right? And if I don't know, it's because I'm a fraud. It's because I didn't learn enough. It's because I shouldn't be doing this. And really, like the more you work in the industry, you're like, I'm always going to be asking that question because I'm going to be working with new people, new teams, new companies, new products, right? And as soon as you feel comfortable asking those questions and realize it has nothing to do with your ability or like your knowledge or your capability of doing the job, that it's just part of the job, right? It's asking those questions. It makes it so much easier to kind of go through your day, not having all those thoughts, kind of in your head.
Yeah. And taking the pressure off of yourself, the onus off of yourself to saying, well, I am supposed to know this. You're not supposed to know it. That's your point. Your job is to ask questions and not know things. And so you can learn and keep questioning. And then when you think you know, question if you really know, So there's a lot more to it. And so I think relinquishing the idea that I need to be an expert on anything has really helped me, because I came from a field where you needed to be an expert. You needed to have all the letters and numbers behind your title in order to say that, yeah, I know what I'm talking about, And so here it's more of like, the idea is that I don't know and I want to know, It's this urge to constantly learn and know that keeps me employed,
Yeah. I know we're coming up on time here, and I have super enjoyed this conversation with you today. I'd love to ask you one closing question, and it's what's your advice for anybody that might be listening that is not sure if they want to take that next step to start, right? Whether it's with us or any other bootcamp, like they're not sure if they should start the learning process.
Yeah, I think for me, I think of my life like time. What's my time worth and my time? What's the value of it? And this was definitely a value of my time, for the price point and for the amount that you learn and the community that you get and the life-changing experience that you have. I don't know. It just seems like, what do you have to lose? What is there that you possibly have to lose? A couple months of your time. You'll learn a lot about yourself through the process. And if you're trying to transition as a career person, I think that the biggest piece of advice I could give you is just find what makes you happy and go for that, because the rest of it is for the birds. My happiness shifted from theater to my family. And now I get to spend 6 extra hours a day with my family, and I get paid nearly twice as much money as I was. So I'm happy. It was worth it. It was very much worth it.
Awesome.
And I still write. Yeah. I still write and do plays and stuff like that. I still love theater. I still read. There's other ways that you can enjoy other parts of your life without having to be defined by it. So anyway, sorry.
It's no, I was gonna say, it sounds like you're resolving that identity crisis you mentioned. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope everyone listening kind of like got everything that I did out of it. And I wish you honestly the best in your career. And I know we'll keep talking, but thank you for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and appreciate it.